Hello, everybody. Happy Sunday to you. First, I want to say thank you for coming here today on a Sunday when we could all be outside at the park or doing something, golfing perhaps, social distancing. And the way I golf, it would be very social distancing because it would be off the Fairview. Well, first off, we want to say thank you to Aircraft Spruce for sponsoring our webinars on Friday, Saturday, and today. It's wonderful for them to do that. We're looking forward to future relationships with them on future conversations. And so here we are, the gathering at Wapaka, virtual gathering, and many of you, we see who's on board with us, have been to the gathering at Wapaka in Wisconsin. A lot of fun, but here we are, we're stuck at home and we're gonna make it happen. And today we have Steve Ells talking about yes, you can paint your airplane. And then after that, we have Kevin Garrison, a little time with our members afterwards. Those that have not been to the gathering at Wapaka, it's a lot of fun. We do it every year. It's the Sunday right before AirVenture starts. And this is a little picture from last year's gathering. We had like 80 people show up. A ton of fun. We have a lot of fun with this. Hopefully next year, 2021, I'm sure AirVenture should be on and good to go. I would hope this isn't going to happen and continue to last this long. So with that being said, I'm going to hand the floor over to Steve. Obviously, everybody knows Steve, one of our contributing editors for Piper Flyer, Cessna Flyer. And yes, you can paint your airplane. And now I'm handing the floor over to Steve.
Okay, everybody, can you see me and see my presentation up on the screen? Okay. I'm gonna talk about spot painting first. Little repairs you can do on your airplane, the proper technique, proper tools, and some hints and tips. The paint on my airplane is 35 years old. No, actually 1985 was painted by a company down in Arizona. That company has disappeared, but the paint's still on. This is, of course, an airplane that's stripped, an Alaska airplane, and he takes all the paint off because he wanted the airplane to be as light as possible. So, excuse me, during a painting, a full aircraft painting, you're going to take off the paint that's old, the paint that's fading, the paint that looks a little busy, or maybe you want a paint job that more suits your tastes. This is the original paint job of Aero Commander. I was the project manager on it for AOPA when we converted it into a giveaway airplane. It looks pretty good from 30 feet, but it was a little tired, and we wanted to fully refurbish the airplane. So we took it over to Arizona. They completely stripped all the paint off. This is the airplane in prime. You can see they've taken off all the control surfaces, the rudder, the elevators, the ailerons, the plastic wingtips, the cowling, etc. And they've covered up the windows. We'll talk about the proper way to do that. But first, let's start with something small. Okay, this is where the airplane finally ended up. This is the giveaway airplane from I think it was 2007, and a gentleman out here in California won it. Okay, who says you can paint your airplane? Actually, the FAA says so. It's what they call preventive maintenance. You can see that the preventive maintenance is limited to some work, and it does include item number 9 in the list, refinishing decorative coatings of the fuselage, of the wings, of the tail group surfaces, fairings, cowlings, landing gear, cabin, and cockpit interior. Excuse me. When removal or disassembly of any primary structure or operating system is not required. The only thing that it limits as far as preventive maintenance task would be the balance control surfaces, which are again, the rudder, the elevators or stabilator, and the ailerons. So, you know, it's a free ride. Basically, you can do it. It's legal to do it. You better know what you're doing, though. So let's start small. This is a little decorative stripe on the wing of my Comanche. You can see some of the paint's flaked off. When I take people for rides, those are the things they seem to see. The little paint miscues. That's how they judge the airplane. So I found it very easy to repair this, and I'll tell you how I did it. There was also a spot over the cabin door. Yeah, here's the spot over the cabin door, and that's what they look at right when they get in the airplane. So what's the tools you use for this? First, you're gonna want to fair the paint, or you want to smooth the edges out. And basically for that, I don't use tools. I just use a hand sanding block. That picture there is the hand sanding block, and you can see it's got 3 little nails sticking up. The point of that is to stick the end of a sheet of sandpaper in there and close the top half of the sanding block, and that holds the paper in place. Interestingly enough, these sandpaper blocks, or sanding blocks, are exactly the size of 1/4 sheet of sanding paper. So if you take a piece of sandpaper, fold it in half, cut it down the center line, and fold each half again and cut it down the center line, you'll have 4 pieces of paper that fit exactly in a sanding block. One of the things that professionals do is they rip those old pieces of sandpaper off there pretty quickly, because it doesn't take long before sandpaper is no longer effective, and you're spending more time rubbing than you are actually cutting the paint. So, excuse me. It's important to use the correct type of sandpaper because of something called dissimilar metal corrosion. And in aircraft, aluminum airplanes, you want to use aluminum oxide sandpaper. The FAA recommends 240 grit or finer for the initial sanding, and then 400 grit to finally smooth everything off. So you can see here how I have started to feather all the paint out, and use water, just run water off it, off a rag as you're sanding. It'll wash away all the paint and all the grit off your sanding block. You test to make sure that you've got it faired completely by running your fingernail over the edges. If you can still feel a transition in your fingernail, we'll show you how to do, will be the most effective way to feel that. Then you need to sand it down a little farther. So after you get it all sanded down and smoothed out the way you want it, to blend it together for a smooth transition, this is some sanding I did on the top of the airplane. There was a very small spot that was immediately obvious, but as I sanded it and washed it with the water, more and more little spots showed up, which meant the paint was pretty thin up there. So I did the same thing, flushed the sanding and the paint away with fresh water, all the edges, to make sure everything is fared smoothly. And the next step is to, it used to be when you're painting, you use something called an acid etch to absolutely clean the paint, and then you do a prep coat for with something called iodine. And iodine colored everything sort of a golden tinge, and it prepped the surface for painting. Today we use something that the problem with the acid etch and the iodine was one of those semi-toxic liquids that you didn't really want to use if you didn't have to, but for a long time that was all we had. Today we have this pre-coat stuff, and pre-coat is completely non-toxic. It's relatively inexpensive, and use that after you've done all your sanding and all your dried off the material. Just put a little pre-coat on there, and that gets it ready for paint. The paint will lay down and stick very well after you've pre-coated the surface. And you can buy that down at Aircraft Spruce, 23 bucks a quart. It'll last a long time. I use rattle can primer because I basically was just touching up my existing paint job to make the airplane look a little better. And this stuff you can buy at Aircraft Spruce. It used to be zinc chromate was the primer of choice, but somehow it wasn't as green as needed. So now we have zinc phosphate. It still lays down very well and provides a good primer surface. Again, Aircraft Spruce. One of the keys to using these rattle cans, and I call it a rattle can because every one of these little spray cans has a BB inside, and you shake it up and you hear this BB banging around inside. So a rattle can. And most people don't shake it up enough. Most people hear that BB bouncing around 10 or 12 times and they think they've done. I recommend you spend a good 5 minutes shaking that can up and down, rattling around, roll it in rotation, flip the end, rattle it again, get it really mixed up, because if it's all mixed up, it'll lay down perfectly. But if you half step it, you're creating problems. So anyway, this is what I used. You can see I mask it off. I created a little mask with some masking paper. The masking paper I just bought out at the local hardware store. And I just laid a soft coat of primer over there. As it says on the side there, light pressure when you're sanding, water in a circular motion. We're not sanding back and forth or left and right. We're going in a circular motion and continuing to flush away all the old paint and all the sanding material. So again, check it with your fingernail to make sure the transitions are all smooth, and dry it completely, and then do your little pre-coat. So this is after priming. You don't need to lay a lot of paint on when you're priming. You're just enough to dampen the surface. So that's been primed, and the mask is gone. So next, and same thing here. I've did a little masking on the roof by the door there and put a light coat of primer on. Just enough. You're not trying to cover anything up with primer. You're just trying to lay down a coat that grips really well to the metal, so the paint can grip really well to the primer. Okay, and then when you get to the painting stage, this is an illustration I picked out of AC 43. Actually, I picked it out of the Aviation Mechanics Bulletin, and it talks about how you do not want to create an arc stroke when you're painting. Well, that applies to when you're painting large surfaces. In this case, we want to do an arc stroke. We want to hold the can sort of away from the surface and then bring it down and drag it across the surface and bring it away, because we're trying to blend in the coat, the coat of paint we're putting down. So the first coat will be what they call a tack coat. That's a light overall coat of paint, not enough to even, well, it'll change the color slightly because you're putting a light coat of paint over the primer, but it's not a finish coat. The tack coat should be very quickly applied. It doesn't take too long to put on. And then you wait 5 to 20 minutes for it to sort of set. And then you come back and you do 2 cross coats. So you'll do a cross coat from left to right and a cross coat from top to bottom. And that should cover up the surface. And you want to put it on so you can sort of see it flowing. It's supposed to be liquid and solid once it gets on the surface that you're putting it on. There will be some overspray. So that's where you need to mask off all your windows and any place you don't want the overspray. I'll explain what to do with the overspray in a minute. This is the paint I used, you know. It's got it down at the hardware store. It's not aircraft quality finish paint, but it's good touch-up paint. And I'm lucky enough that for some reason, this gloss white matched the gloss white of my airplane perfectly. Don't ask me why, just lucky that day. But I'll talk about paint matching in a minute. You can see that now I've masked off. I'm going to do the white, and you can see that it's got a little tack coat on it already. You can see the white speckles over the primer. And here, there's a little tack coat over this too. You can sort of see it from up above. The part I want to paint is the part, like I said, that any passengers getting in my Comanche, and through the one door that's in my Comanche, will see that paint. And you know, it was very easy to touch up, and it made it look good. And I think it'll help the customers be more satisfied. Not customers, I mean my friends and the people I give rides to. So that's ready for the finish coat. After I sprayed the finish coat on the mask off wing area, you always pull the tape away from the paint on an oblique angle. You don't want to pull it straight down the paint line. Pull it away from the paint. And this is an example of me doing that. That will prevent, that will make a good separation between the paint and the area you mask off. You can see that I use some real fine line masking tape. This is some expensive stuff. You don't necessarily have to use this. Good quality masking tape will work fine. One of the steps you'll want to do before you ever start applying paint is to make sure your masking paper is set in place well. Oftentimes I'll use a little plastic handle, a paddle, to push that down in there, or I don't really want to get my fingernails or my hands near it. Nitrile glove would be okay. You don't want to contaminate the paint surface with your body oils. So cleanliness. So you can see I'm just pulling it straight away, and it turned out great. There's the white. You can see, if you look closely, sort of at maybe the 11 o'clock position from the area that's primed, you can see a little different coloration. I'm not talking about the one that looks like a window. I'm talking about between that. It looks a little bit lighter. That's a little bit of overspray, and that the way you finish with the overspray, or the way you get rid of the overspray and blend it in better, is use 600 grit sandpaper on your sanding block and lightly sand it with water. And that'll take the bumps off, and it'll be turn smooth, and it'll look great. So there's always a little overspray when you do spot painting like this. If you're not too crazy, if you're not too crazy about, if you're not too exuberant about putting paint on, the overspray will not be much of a problem. So that's that part. Then I mask off and decided to paint the red, and I just went down to the local hardware store and got a can of Krylon Cherry Red, and it matched. And so, you know, this is proof that it'll probably work out for you if you just go after it. You can see here that after I touched up, put the finish coats up on the fuselage, they came out really well. Again, if you look up in this area, you can see how it's sort of a different color. That's just a little bit of the overspray. And like I said, after everything dries off, you can go up there with a little 600 grit and a little water and smooth that out, and it'll blend in very well. Those are basic touch-up tools. Now, if you're lucky enough to have the paint color entered by the last painter, or or if you have original paint, the paint colors will be in the service manual. And you will be able to probably be able to order that paint, or you can take an inspection panel perhaps off the bottom of the wing into a good auto body shop, and they actually have a spectrographic analyzer, and they can analyze that paint and mix you up something perfect. So if you just do spot painting and you want to use a different color that comes out of a rattle can, you can buy these little excuse me, you can buy these little pre-valve sprayers, and this is gas under pressure, and down here in the bottom there's the little place where you put your color, and you can sort of create your own rattle can paint sprayer. These things can be bought at Aircraft Spruce. One thing you'd use almost always on bigger jobs is what they call a tack cloth, to make sure there's no dust, debris, etc. on the surface before you paint. Another thing I didn't mention yet, but is often used in paint a lot, is Scotch-Brite pads. These also can be bought at any hardware store. See them on the left. The little gun on the right is a touch-up size gun. You can use it if you have one instead of the pre-val paint applicator for more sophisticated or different color jobs. On this paint gun, there are two adjustments. You can see one of them just after the nozzle is the amount of air coming out, and that will help you determine the width and the consistency of the spray fan. There's also another knob which you can't see in this picture, but it's just below the air inlet nozzle, and it's the amount of paint that comes out. So you adjust the amount of paint, you adjust the amount of air, and you rotate this nozzle. These two wings are where air comes in to create the proper spray pattern. So you can rotate this nozzle. If you're going vertical, you want the two ears up and down. If you're going horizontal, you want the two ears left and right. So like I say, you before you ever use a paint gun on anything, you want to do a lot of testing on a piece of paper, typically masking paper, to make sure you have the right fan, the right, in other words, the spray pattern is even from top to bottom or left to right, and it's not too much or too little paint. So a lot of the painting skill comes with preparation, and any painter will tell you that. Squirting the paint's the easy part. Getting ready to squirt the paint is what takes all the work. And I've heard paint shops tell me that 80% of their time revolves around prep. Taking off the old paint, or in the case I showed earlier, sanding and smoothing out and fairing the existing paint with a bare spot, cleaning, prepping, pre-coat, masking, priming, and so it takes a lot of time to do this right, but it can be done. It's not magic, and it just takes time to know what you're looking for and to know how to get there. And nothing, and you know, it's sort of fun to get it right. If you just figure out what does what on a paint gun, you'll be very happy if you get it right. Okay, this is actually a picture I did for another article I did years ago, and it shows that little touch-up gun. And in this picture, I'm spraying water, but the idea is that you know, it's not magic. You just learn how to spray paint, and it's pretty. I'd say it's within the capabilities of anybody that takes the time to practice and learn how to do it. And that little touch-up gun right there, that's not a $400 DeVilbiss paint gun. That's one of those that's almost like Harbor Freight unit, you know. So some of the professional paint guns can really lay off the paint, but for most of the touch-up, you don't need that kind of gun. If you're going to paint a whole airplane, of course, that's a different story. Okay, so what about composite parts? You know, what about wingtips, speed mods? How do I match the colors? First off, if you're doing paint stripping, you have to protect the composite parts in the windows. Let's say you put on maybe on a Comanche, you put on aileron and flap gap seals. You want to paint them. You want them to look good. How do you figure out what color to paint? Well, it's not as simple as it looks. Cessna, over the 30-year period, had 3 different colors called Vestal White. They all were different. I don't know why they didn't change the name, but anyway, they must have got different suppliers or a different spec, or somebody in marketing decided one color looked better than the other. But so you can't walk into a store and say, give me some Vestal White for my Cessna, because it may not be the right Vestal White. If your airplane's already been repainted, most paint shops, well, all reputable paint shops, will certainly sometimes give you a little bottle of paint to take with you, and will always enter the type of paint and the color in the engine in your aircraft logbook or on the work order. Well, like I said, if no information is available, like there's no information on my Comanche for the paint shop. It was done in 1985. The paint shop is defunct, and there was nothing entered in the logbook. So you can take an inspection cover. Usually the one off the bottom of a wing is best, because it has hasn't lost its luster due to exposure to atmospheric conditions. It'll be more like the original color. Then take that to a good auto shop, and they'll be able to analyze it and create it. And excuse me. When I lived in Alaska, they didn't have a spectrographic analyzer. They just called Larry out of the back room, and he'd put a little dab of this and a little gob of that in. And then we'd run outside and see if it looked right. And the key is to run outside. Nothing, you cannot visually inspect paint under fluorescent lights. It just doesn't have the right color spectrum for you to get a correct comparison. So that's the way we did it up there. And today there's better ways to do it. Like I said, the good paint shop will know how to do it. So that sort of covers some of the things you need to know about little spot painting, where to get the paint, what the step-by-step procedure is, and how a little bit of touch-up makes a big difference in how the airplane looks. So what about painting the whole airplane? There is a restriction as far as preventive maintenance. You cannot paint the whole airplane. You can paint all the airplane except for the balance control surfaces. And every reputable paint shop will remove the control surfaces. In most cases, they will strip the paint. I would be surprised if a reputable shop does not strip the paint. But sometimes the balance is a little sensitive, and after the initial coat of paint, they will attempt to balance the surface, and they may realize they have to put a little more paint on the aft end to get the balance they want. It's probably not that, well, it isn't that common to have to apply extra paint on a small airplane control surface, because they really don't go that fast, most of them. And of course, the reason, excuse me, let me get a drink here, have a little cough. The reason these control surfaces have to be balanced is to prevent flutter. And flutter is an event that happens, an aerodynamic event that happens. And if it ever happens, it's a bad thing. So we go extra lengths to make sure the paint or the control surface balances within the parameters specified by the manufacturer. So 2 types of overall paint jobs: the squash and squirt, as we call it, where the existing paint is left in place. And if it's a good paint job and there's no flaking off of it, that's a good start. If there's flakes and chunks missing, that's evidence the paint is not sticking very well. And putting new paint over a coat of paint that isn't sticking very well is wasting money. So, but if it sticks well, you may see this more from a sort of an offbeat salesman that's trying to dress up an old airplane. They'll take some Scotch-Brite pads and they'll just scratch the existing paint all over. They'll just create a semi-rough surface so the new paint will grip the surface really well. And then they'll clean it really well, and they'll spray paint over the existing paint. And that adds a lot of weight, 30 to 45 pounds usually. And it only works well if the existing paint is in great shape. So it's done, but it's not done by a good shop. Well, actually, there are some shops that, one shop I talked to said, we will do that if we painted the original paint and we know it's in good shape and it's sticking well. We'll do that for you if you want that. It's quicker and it's less expensive, and it creates a brand new look. Chemical stripper is used to take the paint off airplanes. Used to be that all the paint strippers were based on something called methylene chloride, which is a very hot chemical. If you got it on your skin, it would burn you. If you got it in your eyes, you're in trouble. It had sort of a lot of toxicity, not good for your lungs. It was just nasty stuff, but it worked. Then a gentleman, the guy I talked to about paint stripping was a guy named Scott Weber from Weber Tech LLC. And he invented, as a chemist prior to a paint shop operator, he invented something called a sunset strip. And he'll be available later to answer questions. But this sunset strip is so non-toxic that you can do it in your flip-flops almost. It just goes on, it strips the paint off very well, and it does not present the same problems that the methylene chloride strippers presented, which was after you got the paint off, you still got this hot chemical, which you can lessen the effect of it by diluting it with water, but still you've got sort of a semi-toxic mess you've got to deal with, and it's becoming more and more of a problem on how to deal with those kind of things in most states. So using a eco-friendly stripper is the way to go. I'll talk more about this sunset strip in a little bit, but from what I've seen, that would be exactly what I would use. There's information later in this presentation on how to buy it, how much it costs. So in a strip and paint job, all the plastic composite parts are protected. Windows are protected by wet towels, foil, heavy foil, and metallic tape or metallized tape. With the old ethylene chloride or methylene chloride stripper, you had to take off all the fiberglass and composite parts or protect them with tape. Sunset strips not nearly as toxic or as damaging to some parts, so that's an advantage. And you have to know exactly what you're doing when you're stripping an airplane, or you can end up buying windows or parts. Sometimes the windows, if they get a little chemical etch, can be polished out, especially if it's around the edges. Typically, the government frowns on a whole lot of windshield polishing or material removal from a windshield when it's in the primary vision of the pilot. So unfortunately, most of these, if there is a chemical burn on a window, it's usually around the edges, and that can be polished out with a buffing wheel and the correct abrasives. Okay, got to clean the plane. Scott Weber there did tell me that do not use the aluminum tape you can get down at the hardware store. The tape that he recommends is a mil-spec tape. It's expensive, but the strippers will not coat it, will not touch it. And so again, going that extra mile to make sure you're protecting the windows is worth it, because you don't want to add work to the work you're doing. Strippers work best with the moderate air temperatures. You can see at WeberTechLLC.com, you can see how the Sunset Strip material works. It's also safe to use on carbon fiber and fiberglass, which eliminates some of the work you'd have to do, or you used to have to do, with the methylene chloride stripper. It's estimated it takes 8 to 12 gallons of stripper to take the paint off of 182. So here's an estimate. How much will it cost to strip your airplane and paint it? Well, the tape's about $40 a roll, but it's 60 yards long. One roll will do a complete airplane, we think. 5 gallons that sun strip is $345. So 10 gallons is $690 plus freight from Tulsa. One owner in 1985 posted that he paid $1,500, which today would be $3,400, for 10 gallons of stripper, 4 gallons of epoxy primer, 4 gallons of white base coat, 2 gallons of color, 45 gallons of reducer, and 10 gallons of MEK for cleanup. Now, that $1,500 in 1985 is $3,400 today. Also, I don't know if you can get MEK, methyl ethyl ketone, at different places around the country. It's sort of hard to get here in California these days. It's very hot stuff. But it's an excellent cleaner. So that gives you a rough idea. Now, I recently asked for an estimate from a local painter, a well-respected paint shop, on what it would cost to paint my Comanche. I was told around $15,000. So you can see that if they probably get a break on their parts. So let's say they paid $3,000 for the paint. So it's $12,000 worth of prep. And most, in fact, I've never seen any shops who don't throw in a little bit of repair work with a strip and paint. And that may mean repairing a fiberglass part. It may mean taking out some Bondo that was there. You know, a lot of things show up once the paint is off the airplane that have to be repaired or should be repaired before finishing up the paint job. So a good paint job basically consists of 1,000 tiny steps. Lots of detail work. You know, in addition to this list here, remove the paint, inspect for unrepaired damage, repair as necessary, install windows or airframe mods prior to painting, if you want to do that. Remove the balance control surfaces, remove all the inspection panels, wheel pans, etc. Prep everything for new paint. Then apply primer, apply base coat, almost always a white. Apply paint properly to maintain control surface balance, apply trim colors, reinstall all parts of new hardware. Excellent paint shops will paint the inspection panels, every inspection panel separately, so that when the inspection panel is put back on, or actually when it's removed the first time, it does not tear the paint. In other words, the paint for the surface of the airplane ends at the edge of the inspection panel, but the inspection panel is painted separately. So you remove that panel, you do not affect the overall paint job at the covers of the inspection panel access. So, then there's making sure through the use of compressed air, there's no leftover stripper in any of the seams, making sure there's no water anywhere on the airplane, making sure that all the dust is gone, making sure that, well, for instance, when a lot of paint shops, when they paint an airplane, they flood the floor with water. It keeps down dust. They have a positive pressure or negative pressure, depending on the paint booth. So it keeps dust and dirt and debris out of the paint area, and it also carries away the overspray. This is a project I participated in. This is the AOPA Aircraft Bonanza project, first one I did. It's in strip right here. It was done by a company in Oklahoma. And you can see the foil on the windows. You can see how they just applied all the stripper, and it's cooking, as they might say, It's getting pretty hot and lifting the paint. After that, they put it in prime. You can see the moisture or the flood of the water all over the floor here. That's very common in paint shops. This is a design created by a company called Scheme Designers. Craig Barnett owns Scheme Designers. He's been designing schemes. He found a little niche in this business and created Scheme Designers probably 25 years ago. And so he created 7 or 8 or 9 different schemes, and all the members of AOPA voted on which one they liked, and this was the winner. So then Craig will create very detailed drawings, which we will supply to the paint shop. And the paint shop, and in some cases, if they have trouble, he will actually travel to the shop and help them get the scheme laid out the way it was designed. He's one of a number of designers. Needless to say, his success has bred competition. And also many paint shops, professional paint shops, have good designers that can create a design. What happened to that slide? Okay, there it is. It's all painted. It's Oshkosh, and everybody's oohing and ahhing over it. And it's a very fun project. So that's an example of how you start and how you finish a job. So let's see. I think we're just about done here. I have some references. You can see the Sunset Strip video at WeberTechLLC.com. There are a number of YouTube videos that talk about painting your airplane. 3 or 4 of them, all done by the same guy. Craig Barnett of Scheme Designers is more than willing to answer questions and help out with paints and layouts and things like that. So that's pretty much all I've got to present today. So if you got questions, go ahead and type them into the little chat window down there, and I'll try my best to answer them for you.
Wonderful, wonderful. Great. Thank you, Steve. That was a lot of information there, a lot more than I was. I've done a little touch up here and on some automobiles, completely different when it comes to an airplane, obviously. A lot of things to consider here. I had no idea, but the simplest thing of wetting down a floor, I had no idea they had done that. It's a great idea to keep the dust down. I never would have thought of that. And the control services obviously is a huge thing too, to follow the rules and regulations on that. But yeah, we've got some questions here. So Jen's gonna rattle some of those off.
Okay.
Okay, so our first question, how long do I wait before removing masking tape so that I get clean, sharp edges?
Good question. Actually, it's done pretty quickly. Pretty quickly. You sort of don't want the paint to dry hard before you pull the tape, because it'll they want to pull the tape out and let it settle, let the paint settle. So actually, within a few minutes after you lay the paint on.
Okay.
Good, good.
A couple of people are asking about getting copies of the notes and presentation. The presentation is being recorded and that will be available. And I'm sure Steve would be happy to share information. Somebody had asked for a list of the materials that you're using. So maybe that's something we can get up on the website for them.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. What buffing, this is from Jerry, what buffing compound do you use to remove overspray on windows?
There are a number of different products out there from Aircraft Spruce. You can find them. They start off with like a 400 grit sandpaper and go up to 600 grit, 800 grit. So it's a graduated process where you're basically, the scratches that you're creating, you get finer and finer. As they get finer and finer, you can see through them. You don't see the scratches anymore, but it's just gradually taking off material. I don't remember the names of them all right now, but there are companies out there that sell kits on how to do that. You could probably also go down to your auto parts store and just get fine rubbing compound. But really, the professionals use like a lamb's wool pad and different bits of polishing compound to really finish it off. I think they start with the sandpaper, go to finer and finer grits, and then polish the rest of it with the lamb's wool pad and a rotary sander.
Okay. Okay. What size compressor can you get away with for a 3 square foot area?
Well, that's a good question. You mean to paint 3 square feet?
Let's see if we can get an answer to that. If our questioner will let us know if that's what they mean. You can just type in chat. Let's see here. That was Dave Sheldon. Dave, if you just want to type additional information for us here.
Sounds like the other thing you want to make sure you know is you want to measure the air pressure at the gun, because typically guns have one gun I used to have had a little, actually like a tire gauge. It would pop out the end of the handle, tell you how much pressure was at the gun. The pressure at the compressor is one thing. You want the proper pressure at the gun when you're applying paint. Different paints use different pressures. So
it looks like Dave is saying yes, 3 square feet of surface is what I'm taking this to be.
Well, I don't think you need a whole lot, a very big compressor. I don't think one of those little round pancake compressors has to do with it. The real battle is how big is the tank, because if the tank's big enough, you don't need a huge compressor, because you won't bleed the pressure out of the tank quick enough on that small surface to affect the quality of the job. So big tank, small compressor, that would work better on that kind of job, I think. I don't know how to answer that exactly. I just know you need one big enough to do the job and supply the pressure you need at the end of the job.
Okay, well, one of our other attendees did say compressor type depends on the gun you use. So
now, there is another type of gun I've never used, the high pressure, low volume. I believe it's low pressure, high volume, something anyway. I've never used it. The ones I always used are low pressure, high volume, spray out a big gob of paint. And that gets a lot of overspray. But there's new guns that apparently use a lower pressure and don't have near as much overspray. And I've never used one. I can't answer any questions about that, but that'd be something I would look at if I were going to do a big paint job.
Okay. Now, Sam asks, what about mixing paint types? For example, my plane was painted with Imron. Are there incompatibilities with something I might put on to touch an area up? Some of these paints can be quite dangerous if not handled correctly.
Well, I think Imron, which is it was the paint of choice for like Cessna in the 80s. I think you can get away with putting most anything on it because it's pretty impervious to outside paints. But that's a question I think you probably need to go talk to a paint expert about, because I don't know for sure. Like I said, I don't even know what was on my airplane. I just know that that enamel that came out of a rattle can laid down on it really well. So that's not much help to you, but I'd have to go talk to, I'd recommend you go talk to somebody at an auto paint store, or even if you can find an aviation paint shop.
Okay. Now, you mentioned both sandpaper and 3M red for prepping. This is from Jerry. I was always told to use 3M. Whoops, that disappeared a little too quickly. There we go. I was always told to use 3M and never sandpaper because it eats away at the aluminum. What's your opinion?
Oh, that's a great question. I think that the main abrasive process that is used would be the Scotch-Brite, the 3M. Like you said, it's not abrasive. Sandpaper, I was using sandpaper there to make sure that the existing paint margins are faired in. I was not really working hard at sanding on the aluminum. And that's one reason I specify the aluminum oxide paper. In my mind, there was negligible aluminum removal on those little spot paint jobs I did. But if you don't fair in the existing paint to the surface of the aluminum, it's going to look really bad when you put paint on top of it. So overall, I think Carrie is exactly right. Scotch-Brite is preferable.
Okay. And Donald asks, what about fillers for small dings, stone nicks on leading edge of wing or elevator?
Yeah, Bondo, baby. Bondo is used. And the only place it should never be used is on a control surface. And actually, one of the nightmares for some airplane owners have been to find out that there has been Bondo, quote, repairs on the control surface of the airplane, and Piper doesn't allow any of that, and Cessna doesn't allow any of that. So if you find that, if you take your airplane in and it gets stripped, and they find Bondo on the balanced control surfaces, you're going to pay to get those resurfaced. If you suspect there may be some, you can get a little coin and tap, 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 and listen for the dead sound, which would indicate there's Bondo. But a lot of times, paint shops will fair surfaces using a thick primer, sort of a filling primer, and that makes everything look really good. It adds a little weight, but it makes everything look really smooth. But yes, it's okay to use Bondo, provided the damage is not structural. If it's just little rock nicks and things, that's probably okay. I would say it's okay.
Okay. Now we have Yasin from Bulgaria who's joining us, and
Yep.
he asks for reducing the weight. Let me see. For reducing the weight for the overspray and a full respray. Okay, the whole aircraft had the old paint removed with a vibrating sandpaper. Is it okay? The old paint was rock solid but burnt by the sun. I'm not, let's see. I think he's, yeah.
Well, first off, my antenna went up when he said he took all the old paint off with a vibrating sander, because I've seen planes that, in my mind, were not airworthy after that happened, because some of the rivet heads were reduced by the aggressive sanding. So this is sort of raising some concerns for me.
He does mention taking care not to damage the rivets.
Okay. So I'm not sure what the question was then.
I think he's asking, well, did he call in earlier with a question about whether
He
you,
did.
yeah,
Reply.
okay. I think it's more about whether you have to remove it all
Well,
or leave it. You can maybe paint over, I think.
you can, as I mentioned earlier, that if the existing paint is in good shape, and there's no evidence it's not sticking anywhere, and it's just needs rejuvenation, you might say, or needs livening up, you can paint over it as long as you prep it correctly. There are some ways to rejuvenate old paint. You can polish it. You can apply, they're talking about ceramic coats now. I've never done one. I don't know what it is exactly, but apparently that will create a new smooth surface. I don't know what it'll do for the color. It'll make it pop again, but I've heard of that. I just don't know what it means exactly.
Okay. That kind of leads into our next question, which is, do you have any experience with Superbird paint restoration?
Yeah.
And if you can talk about that.
Yeah, actually, I don't remember the guy's name, but he came to my hangar and we did some Superbird, and all over one wing, the top of one wing and half of the fuselage, and it brightened it up considerably. I thought it did a good job. It's labor intensive. It's all hand labor. But basically he has, I think there's about 4 different bottles of liquid. One of them is to take off the oxidized paint. Then I think the next one fills all the little mini scratches and abrasions on there. And then we shine it up and apply a sealer. And as I recall, he recommends redoing it, I think every year, in order to keep it looking the way it came out. And I thought it was a good product. I'm just lazy. I don't like to work that hard.
Okay. Any cleaning prep required for a wing walk coating?
You're going to take the old wing walk off and put new wing walk on? Yeah, you want to put a good coat of primer down before. And as far as I know, that would be only, well, I might even, if it depends on what kind. If he's putting on the kind that's on paper and it sticks on, that's one thing. If he's painting it on, that's another kind. I'd recommend actually putting finish paint down before you put the wing walk on. And that would mean, a color, a solid color. Not primer is really good for sticking, but it's not very durable. Finish paint is not as good as sticking, but it's really durable. So between the two of them, you get something that sticks well and is durable. So I would put the finish paint down before I put the wing walk on.
Okay. Let's see. If you are adding a stripe of a different color to the paint surface, what is the process? Is sanding done before adding the stripe or just an etchant?
Oh, I think you need, that's an interesting question, because a stripe, how big of a stripe we're talking about? Talking about a stripe like that, it'd be pretty hard to sand, but I don't know, we're getting into, it all depends on what the paint surface you're painting over is, I believe. If it's in good shape, I still think you would Scotch-Brite it. You can get finer grade Scotch-Brite too. You don't have to have that red stuff. There's some other colors and finer. But I believe you want to knock the surface coating off or the whatever the surface is. You want to sort of take that away or smooth it down, make sure there's no old dead paint before you put on another color. I don't know, is Scott still on here? Can Scott come up with an answer for that kind of question?
Scott Weber?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's see if he.
Hello.
Hi, Scott.
Hi, guys. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Scott.
What I would recommend, what we do is I would lightly wet sand it with no grittier than 220. I would probably start out with about 300 grit and wet sand it with water. And if you need to, if it starts pulling too much material into the sandpaper, go down to about 220. But don't go any grittier than 220 because you don't want to remove too much material.
Okay, great. And how about Scotch-Brite? Do you think that would do a good enough job, or you sandpaper?
If it's older paint, kind of like the paint that you were showing on your Comanche, red Scotch-Brite would probably be perfect because it's probably pretty thin and all you need to do is rough it up. And so, yeah, I would try Scotch-Brite first just to see how thick your paint was. Probably is very, will work very well.
Okay, super.
All right, thank you, Scott.
Thanks.
Victor is asking, he says he was advised to clean with alcohol after sanding instead of water. What is your advice?
I use the water for wet sanding, and then I flushed it. I didn't have that pre-coat, so I flushed it with acetone. I just washed it with acetone, not alcohol, and with a real clean rag, and that would clean it up enough where the paint lays down well.
Okay, and John is asking, can you touch up landing gear parts? If so, any special prep required for grease removal?
Yeah, you can touch up landing gear parts. That's part of the the preventive maintenance listed. Well, again, things like acetone, solvent called Stoddard solvent. Stoddard solvent will remove all the grease, but it's not a good service, not a good prep for paint because it's sort of oily. Acetone will remove all the oils. Again, it's a case of fairing in the places where the paint is chunked off, and prepping with a primer, and then painting your finish coat. And I did my landing gear, and once again I did it with a rattle can. And there happens to be I'm not a big fan of Rust-Oleum rattle can paint. I think it takes forever to dry, and fortunately there's better out there. Krylon's pretty good. The hardware store called Orchard Supply, which was bought up by Lowe's, used to have the best rattle can paint in the world, but needless to say, they let the big vendors come in and sell their paint there instead of regular Osh paint. So I still got some rat hole in the corner, and that's what I like.
Okay. Now, Donald Neville has a follow-up question about the nicks, but I'm not completely sure what you're asking, Donald. So if you want to retype that, you're asking what kind of a product? And in the meantime, let's see. Merrick is asking about clear coat. Does that complicate a touch-up?
Yeah.
Short
Actually,
answer.
clear coat is fantastic for cars because the painter, the guy that applies the color, does not have to be very good. You just lay the color on there, smooth it out, lay the clear coat on there and smooth it out, and it turns out fantastic. And so, but I've never painted with clear coat. Let's ask Scott that question. You put clear coat on any of the airplanes you paint, Scott?
Yes, we use clear coat on metallic. If you paint a metallic paint, you need to clear coat it. Otherwise, it's not as durable as your solid surfaces, and you have a much higher chance of it coming off with just wind abrasion if you don't clear coat.
Okay. But as a whole, on overall paint job on an airplane, you do not clear coat, right?
That's correct. We do not clear coat, only when we do metallic stripes.
Okay. I think that's about it for the questions. If you didn't get your question answered or you want some additional information, you can always reach out to Steve using editor@cessnaflyer.org or editor@piperflyer.org. We make sure he gets those questions and he will be happy to get those answered. We want to thank Steve for being here. Great presentation. Thank you, Scott Weber, for being here as well. Appreciate the information.